you've come up with a few things, some observations. What I presented in that first little bit was not comprehensive, was not everything. It's just some of the reflections of what's going on. But just coming back to that sense of understanding what is the soil and the climate, where we start with where we are and what's going on, what's in our individually, in our communities, and also in our nation with the people that we know. And we're going to show a couple of little videos now, hopefully, if they work, from the Diocese of Norwich. So talking about some of the things that they are doing. We've got 5 videos throughout the day in little groups, loosely related to where we are in the day, but not entirely. So let's see if we can get one to go.
Hello, I'm Keith, and I'm the team vicar for the Reimagine and Wensum Valley group of parishes, 12 parishes in rural Norfolk. I work with my wife, Reverend Helen Lengert, who's the team rector, and between us we both have a chaplaincy role for the high school, myself, and the sixth form college, Reverend Helen, although they're both on the same site, so we tend to cross over quite a bit. But why be a chaplain to a high school? Well, school chaplaincy isn't particularly a new ministry. Many schools in our country have chaplains. These have tended traditionally to be in the independent section, but that's not solely the case anymore. Reimagine High School is part of the Synergy Academy, so it has many schools under its umbrella. Why be a school chaplain at all? I mean, as the incumbent, aren't you kind of already associated with the schools in your parish? The answer is, well, yes, I would hope an incumbent would be associated with their schools. High schools are very different, of course, to primary schools in chaplaincy. It's a very formative stage in a young person's life. Children who come in age 11 and leave as young adults at age 18, a lot happens. And the school has a fantastic pastoral team. Schools are so much more than just places of education and academia. They're places where the whole child is cared for. So it's a natural fit for a chaplain to be those who have a heart for pastoral care and a heart for pastoral care for our young. And by young, I don't just mean the students. From my perspective, many of the teachers are young as well. There's 1 or 2 that are older than me, but that demographic is the demographic age-wise that is largely missing from our pews on a Sunday morning. But that doesn't mean to say they're kind of some alternative church. A chaplain is often the guest of a host organisation, often a secular organisation. So you don't have the same automatic rights and privilege you're going to have in your church on a Sunday morning. And that's a special honour. And the people that we serve as chaplains are people just as dear to God's heart as the people who come into our church buildings on a Sunday. God loves this ministry, God loves these people. So I love these people too.
Hi, my name's Darlene Clatton and I'm rector of Great Plumstead, Little Plumstead, Witton, Rackheath and Salhouse, otherwise known as the Bitton Benefice, a group of 5 small rural parishes. For much of the last year, the doors to our church buildings have been closed, but that hasn't stopped us being church in the community. One of the things we got involved with was the Filling the Gap project last summer, taking out food parcels to families. And at the end of the summer, we decided that the need went on beyond just those holidays. And so we set up our own scheme to provide food for the coming holidays and also to provide tough times boxes for families. That was a bit like step into the unknown in a way, stepping out in faith, because we didn't know where the food was going to come from. So we've sent a shout out to the church community, and our harvest collections went for the project last year. We then sent a shout out to the local community and provided a day when they could bring food into us. We were just overwhelmed by the response that we got from that. The local Baptist church also approached us and asked if they could donate food, and so did one of our local community shops. So we needn't have worried about where the food was coming from, and we were able to provide food parcels at both half term in the autumn and at Christmas. And at Christmas we had an overwhelming amount of other goods as well, such as games and puzzles to send out. And the project has gone on, and we're still getting food in, and we recently delivered 19 food parcels, and we're now stocking up on Easter eggs for Easter. And it's been great because we've been able to involve the whole community. The church community, no matter what age group you were, everyone's been able to do something, whether it was just giving a tin of beans, making up boxes, or actually delivering the food parcels. The wider community has got involved, and we've been able to engage with them. And of course, we've engaged with the families that we've met each week. And why have we done it? Because we have a strapline that says, worshipping and working together to share the love of God. And what better way to show God's love in action than to serve our local community and to make relationships with them.
Two videos that I think in some sense illustrate, quite traditional in some ways, but they illustrate something important, I think, both of them in their own right. One is about listening, about understanding what is the reality of the situation, and we can't force a way on something for our own benefit. So understanding the culture, and particularly with something like chaplaincy, understanding the place that we are and what is going on is really crucial. Knowing and being respectful to that context, not trying to force on it a shape or a pattern or a model that just isn't where it's at, isn't who it is. And I think that sense of listening to the cry and the need. So listening to the soil, if you like, because we're going back to that metaphor, that will overplay the metaphor of agriculture. But it is really, where we start with listening and understanding the context, the soil, and the climate. Not only what is going on in a negative sense, but what's going on in a positive sense. How do we understand where God is already at work, whether that is actually building something and tending what's growing, or whether that's actually making people aware of the need and exposing something in our society of its need for sustenance, its need for nutrients, its need, and there's a couple of things in the chat which I really like that I was going to mention linking about this, that's need for rest. And sometimes, we might have an agenda that we want to do something, but our place and our time is not ready and needs to be fallow and needs to rest. So respecting that culture and that community, listening to what is going on, listening to its needs, not as a client's provider mentality, but as part of the community. And that for me is actually where we begin. And it was also mentioned in the chat about what is toxic, and I think understanding what is toxic. And so where we offer both healing and nourishment, where we offer the need to get things out, whether they be weeds or poisons, and where we recognize the need to put things in, whether that be nourishment, nutrients, fertilizer, if you like, or just our hands into the soil, into what is going on around us. And for me, I think one of the key things that we've thought about mission over the last 20 plus years, and probably beyond, but we can go back to people like Bonhoeffer and others talking, and even Vincent Donovan, if you've never read Vincent Donovan's Christianity Rediscovered, his journey to do mission with the Maasai, I think is an amazing story of learning that mission isn't about doing unto, it's about doing with, it's about understanding, loving, and serving. And this passage in Mark 12, you'll be very, very familiar with it. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. The second commandment is this: love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. So when we begin thinking about what is our calling to mission, what does mission look like? It comes back to these two things. We love and serve a God who wants to change the world. And in doing so, we need to learn to love those that we are called to serve, those that we are with. And that, amongst all things, above all things, when I've taught for many years on mission and different levels of training, it comes back often to that thing about, well, if you feel called to a place, if you find yourself in a place, one of the first questions you need to ask is, where is God? What is God doing? What is the cry of God in this place and for this place? And then the second one, and perhaps the toughest question, is, can I really learn to love the place where I am and the people that I'm with? Because if we don't, then they just become a crop, a product, something that we consume on our spreadsheets or on our average annual Sunday worship forms or whatever it is. They just become a number for us to count. Years ago, when I was training to be a youth minister back in the early 90s, I accidentally found myself hanging out with a bunch of guys through one of my hobbies. And one or two of you have heard this story before, but one of my hobbies has always been scooters, Italian scooters. I grew up in the mod revival. And when I was training to be a youth worker, I was running an open youth club one night, and this guy pulled into the house next door on a Vespa. So I stuck my head over the fence to have a chat with him, and he was covered in his waterproofs. So I didn't really see much of him, but I got chatting to him, and he said, well, there's a bunch of us meet every Sunday lunchtime down at this pub. Do you fancy coming down? And so I said, yeah, okay. So the next Sunday I rode my Vespa to church and then drove down to this pub at lunchtime and sat in this pub, first of all on my own. And then gradually these guys and girls from this scooter club started to come into the pub. And it was an interesting sight because they all looked the same, boys and girls. They all had very, very short hair, were wearing black combat trousers and black flying jackets and red braces and Doc Martin boots. And I discovered myself, to cut a long story short, sitting in a pub with about 20 odd neo-Nazi skinheads. And after chatting to them for a little while, the guy that I first met in the pub, on the street, turned to me and said, do you want to join our scooter club? And I said, well, okay, yeah, I guess so. But, you know, I just want you to know that I'm a little bit different from you. And my politics are somewhat left of yours. I'm a Christian. I work for the church. This is what I do. And I said, you know what, I'd be happy to join, but if I'm with you and I think you're being abusive to somebody, I'll be with them and you'll have to go through me. To which the reply came back quicker than I hoped. Yeah, that's no problem. And I'm still not quite sure whether they meant it was no problem that they didn't mind that, or it would be no problem to go through me. Either would be as true. But actually the lesson I had to learn as I reflected on with these guys is, well, okay, if this is where you put me, God, my first question is, can I love these people? Can I really love them for who they are as children of God? They're neo-Nazi skinheads, and most of them, it turns out, were either Millwall or Chelsea football hooligans. And I had to say, well, you know what, if these are your children, how do I love them? And it's not an easy question to ask. How do I love the people that you've put me with? How do I love them as my neighbors, as people that I'd happily share a driveway with, a cup of coffee with, a chat over the garden fence? How do I love them as people? So that's really the beginning for me when we start thinking about, if we are here to do mission, if we're going to plant seeds, if we're going to grow, can we love them as equals? Can we love them as fellow members of the family of God? And if so, how do we feed them? Because often we think about mission as our own from our own perspective. What do we want to get out of it? We want more people. We want better this. We want more that. But actually, what does it mean to feed the shoots of the place that we're in? To put in the nutrients, to allow the fallow time. Some thoughts. I think people today are beginning to recognize, and have done for a while, the need for community. How do we feed that need for community? How do we put in that which will help community to grow? What does that look like? I guess it begins to some extent with reflecting on what does it mean for us to be community? Not a club, not a social club or a religious club, but a community. How do we wrestle with what it is to be community? You know, Jesus said to his disciples, love one another as I've loved you. What does that look like? How do we build communities that are built on forgiveness, grace, mercy, justice, that are built on the kind of love that Jesus shows for us? This, for me, is 101, if you like, of discipleship. Of what does it mean to love one another? And how do we then love each other, love those in our communities, even if they are unlovely to our first glance? So for me, the first nutrient we need to start thinking about, if we're thinking about reimagining mission, the first thing we need to put on the soil, is community, is love. It's not as easy as it sounds. It's not as easy as it sounds, but can we really love them? Because if we're not going to try, if we can't, then it might be best to move on and think about something else. The second thing that occurs to me in the society we're in at the moment is the need for healing. We, for many years, I showed you a little picture of one of our guys at the Mind, Body, Spirit Fair, and we've been involved for 15 odd years in Mind, Body, Spirit Fairs and ministry with pagans and new spirituals and so on. And when we started going to the Mind, Body, Spirit Fairs, and we instead of putting up a stall and selling things or offering things, we put down our table and we put a load of floor cushions down and we put a kettle on. And we said, come and sit down on a floor cushion. And you might be waiting in a queue to see a medium or going for a color therapy or whatever it is. You have your aura read. While you're waiting for your appointment, come and sit down and have a cup of tea and talk to us. And we started listening to why people were going to these things, what it meant for them. And actually what we found was almost universally, they were looking for healing, whether that be physical healing, spiritual healing, mental healing, just healing. They wanted to feel better. They wanted to feel whole. And that need for healing. And I'm not talking necessarily about here sort of healing on the streets. You know, that's up for folks to find what does healing mean. But how do we as a church offer healing in our society? What does that look like? How do we offer a different way of being, a more holistic, harmonious, healthier, well-being way of living for people? Third thing is justice. And a lot of people in our society who feel that they have not received justice for whatever reason, whether that be because of the color of the skin, their age, their gender, their sexuality. What does it mean to offer justice or to fight for justice? I'm always struck, one of my favorite passages is Micah 6, verse 6 to 8. You know, when the people are asking God, what should they do to please God? And the prophet says, well, you know what you should do. You've been told what you should do. Act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. Act justly, to love mercy, to in all things act justly. In every dealing that we have with another person, act justly, whether that be fair trade, the way we run our business, the way we listen to somebody, the way we don't box them or put them labels on them, but how do we offer them and give them justice? But at the same time, love mercy, not demand justice for ourselves, but be willing to let go of our sense of justice, our need for others. So what does it mean to put justice into the soil as a church? What does it mean to say, well, God values you for who you are, regardless of what anybody else may think? You are deserving of justice. You are deserving of love, and you are deserving of your rights under God. I'm not talking here about civil justice, but justice under God. So what does it mean to put that in the soil? the need for blessing. Written a bit on this recently and been writing some liturgy and poetry on this sense of the need for blessing. And going back to that Jeremiah 29 verse 7, you know, praying for the peace and prosperity of Babylon, because that is what our peace is based on. The need to bless the land. And I loved all those, although they got a bit annoying after a while, all those blessings that were going out during the first lockdown, those videos, a blessing for Ireland, a blessing for England, a blessing for Telford, a blessing for, but what does it mean to bless? Well, how can we turn this need for our sense of mission on its head and stop thinking about it being about us, but thinking about what does it mean as a church to bless the place that we're in? We had this little idea in the first lockdown when it was starting to ease that we'd write little blessings on cards and tie them to street signs or door handles of businesses and just offer a blessing. And years ago, I was in, this came to me really because years ago I was in Rio when I was working with the Church Mission Society, and one of the vicars who was serving the City of God, which is a favela in the heart of Rio, one of the most dangerous places on the earth, walked us round. And as we were going round, this young lass, about 16, 17-year-old lass, came to talk to us, and she garbled at me in Portuguese, of which I speak not a word. But what I could tell was that she was covered in homemade tattoos. She didn't have any teeth, and she clearly just had a baby. And she chatted to Father Nicholas, who I was with after I couldn't communicate with her. I couldn't understand. I mean, well, I could, but not verbally. And then she then disappeared. And then a few minutes later, as we were walking through, we headed off into the sort of deepest part of the favela. And we said to Father Nicholas, "Where are we going?" He said, "Well, we're just going to bless a baby." And so we walked into this deepest part of the favela, and we could see the guys with guns and the drugs, and it was a bit of a frightening experience, and getting more and more frightening as we went deeper into the favela. And then suddenly, out of this little stucco house behind a sheet that was hanging instead of a door, came this girl and this little baby, this 5-day-old baby, and she got off crack cocaine the day the baby was born. So for 5 days, she'd been off crack for the first time in many years. And she just said, "Would you bless my baby?" And we surrounded this little baby. We got in a ring around it and played a blessing over this baby, Tiago Gabriel, James Gabriel, what a name. And we blessed this little baby, and then we went on our way. And I spoke to my host, the person I was staying with, about that evening. He said, "What have you been up to today?" And I said, and I mentioned Father Nicholas, and he said, and I'll never forget these words. He said, "Nicholas is like Jesus. He walks the streets and he blesses the people he meets." And I just love that, to walk the streets and bless the people we meet. The need for blessing. And there is need for hope. Clearly talking about some of the things that we've experienced in our society over the last year. But there is need for hope and for good news. What does it mean to put hope into the soil? What does it mean to put the hope for a friendly face, a hug, a human connection, the hope for God, for healing, for peace, for justice, for all of those things that are at the heart of the gospel? How do we offer hope? So there's a few things. I've not offered you solutions yet, if I'm ever going to. But what I am trying to offer you some thoughts about, well, what does it mean? If we're going to reimagine mission, let's get back. And what does that metaphor mean? So we're going to go back into breakout groups. What do you hear? What does this mean for you in your context and in your culture?
I'm actually on the call.
Oh!
No, I'm happy to actually talk live. If
Brilliant. Okay. Go for it.
Yes, from Charlie. I'm a licensed lay minister in Diocese of Norwich, and I'm trying to grow something called Wild Church because I'm passionate about being outdoors. And there's lots of amazing natural spaces where I live. And the idea of Wild Church is, it kind of touches on what you've been saying, Mark, about having a holistic sense and bringing people together for their physical health, mental well-being, and bringing people together for community and then the social side. And it's also a place to look after, to teach and talk to people about the planet and how we can do more to look after it. And it kind of started to be launched in the first lockdown, so it moved online, and I'm looking forward to hopefully getting outside in this nicer weather as lockdown starts to ease. But yeah, it's bringing community together over a shared love for being outside.
I think what I found encouraging about it, and the next one, which I'll show you, is actually understanding people's, their health and their well-being needs, and what it is, the need for community, and for space and for fresh air and activity in terms of well-being. So I kind of love that. The need for wildness too. There's a lot of talk about rewilding at the moment, and that's a really positive thing. The need for wildness and reconnection. So the next video before we go for a break.
I'm happy to talk live if that's easier.
Okay, go for it, Laura. People are struggling to hear that as well. Go for it, Laura.
Yeah, no worries. I'll reiterate quickly. So yeah, basically, I was back in 2014. I was working in an office setting, living in the city, very independent, loving life. And then at the spring of 2014, I was diagnosed with a really rare condition called ecology, which basically meant my esophagus didn't work and I couldn't eat or drink anything. And so thankfully later that year in the December, I had surgery that enabled me to eat again. And I was really excited to get back to life. But during the time I'd been really ill, I'd had to stop work, and it given me time to kind of think about what I was passionate about, what I wanted to do. And it made me think about the youth work I'd been doing. So I decided to go to Ridley Hall in Cambridge to train as a lay minister on the theology, ministry and mission course, and got my degree with a youth focus. But partway through the course, I became even more unwell with lots of fatigue and pain, things like that. That meant I was unable to carry out the practical elements of the course. Thankfully, the course was really great, and they were able to help me that I was able to graduate in January of 2019. But I realised that youth work wasn't something I could physically do anymore, and maybe that I wasn't as passionate about anymore. So I ended up going back to my work in my office job. And whilst I was there, I was working as a social media marketing person, but I'd never used Twitter before. And so I went to use Twitter to try and work out how to use it ready for work. And in that time, I realized that I could also try and connect with people who were like me online. And so I was using hashtags and things like that, and found lots of people like myself with chronic illness, Christians with chronic illness and disability, and wanted to connect with them to try and find out more about how they were accessing church and things like that. And in the end, I ended up building this online community called You Belong, which is now working towards charity status as a community online for people with chronic illness and disability to connect with one another and with God.
Thank you, Laura. And I think, connecting with Charlie's story about supporting the needs of people, understanding who we are and what we bring, and our stories are part of that. And I think what I really loved about your story, Laura, is that it was your, if you like, and I hate to use this word, but your weakness that actually became your strength, because it gave you a place of understanding, of real understanding of real people and real lives. And I think that is a very powerful thing. And we may not all have such sort of big stories, but we all understand what it is to be human. We all understand what it is to go through what we've been through over the last year and beyond. And sometimes we can forget that and think we're different. And actually connecting with people as who we are and where we are and finding God in the midst of that is really important and powerful. So thank you for that, Laura. Okay, apologies for the volume. I think that the last video we've got is a bit louder. So we'll hopefully that will work later. But we're going to take a comfort break for 5 minutes now. So go and put the kettle on or make yourself more comfortable in whatever way you prefer.